One of the things that I hear a lot is that school gardens provide a lot of value both to the schools themselves and to the students. So let's talk about the challenges that are keeping them from being in every school across the country and some ways that we can actually view those as opportunities. Hi, welcome to the LEHR Innovations channel. My name is Edmund Williams, and today we're going to be talking about school gardens and how we can make them much better, both for the schools and for the company that's helping make those, the LEHR Enterprise. Before I jump into that, though, I want to cover a couple of assumptions that I'm going to be proceeding with on this video, and I'm actually going to cover the rationale behind these assumptions in a later video. So the first assumption is that a enterprise that's building LEHR Gardens is, by necessity, first and foremost, a soil production company. We're going to be focusing on creating that LEHR soil amplifier, and everything else actually becomes kind of a support around that soil amplifier. Again, I'll explain that later. The second assumption is that when I have the choice of either building a big farm to produce a ton of my own LEHR soil amplifier versus building gardens in people's backyards and letting them produce it for me, the better option of that is actually the latter. It's actually a combination of the two, but we're going to go with I want other people to be producing my soil amplifier for me. Okay, so for that, towards that end, a school is actually a really good option because schools have a lot of land. A lot of those schools would very much love to put a garden in and use that to help teach their students how to produce their own food. And in fact, there's actually a lot of other things that you can learn, especially with a LEHR garden. You've got the opportunity to learn food production, to learn ecology, biology. With a LEHR garden, there's some STEM opportunities in there as well. So there's a lot of different things that you can learn off of a school garden. So what's the challenge? There's actually quite a few challenges, but the single biggest challenge that I've heard every single time is that every single school garden lives or dies on whether or not they have a champion on faculty or staff. If you have a person at that school who works at that school who's willing to stay late to maintain the garden, come in on the weekend to make sure that things are taken care of, that garden will flourish, it will succeed. If you don't have that person, that garden is going to die on the vine every single time. And I've heard this over and over again. And that's actually one of the places where a LEHR garden can really shine, because a LEHR garden doesn't actually require hardly any maintenance. So, you have somebody who may stay late one night a week, one night every couple of weeks. They don't need to come in on the weekend ever, unless there's a piece of produce that they were particularly had their eye on and it's going to be ripe over the weekend. But in terms of the actual maintenance, the LEHR garden is going to run itself, and that's something that's going to work really well in schools. One of the other challenges that I've heard here in Phoenix, and these might be somewhat unique to Phoenix, but I'm sure they're not completely unique to Phoenix. There's actually two pieces to it. There's, number one, there's soil and there's water. So I was talking to an official at the city of Phoenix, and she told me that every time they've tested the soil at a garden or a school, in out ahead of trying to build a community or a school garden, they found that soil in the Phoenix area was contaminated with heavy metals, and they couldn't actually grow there. They had to find a way of removing the soil or replacing it or doing something like that. And a LEHR garden naturally does that anyway. The second piece is water. We are in a situation where we're having an extended drought that's challenging our water rights, and people are not going to be interested in a school garden that's going to be using tons and tons of excess water. That's something that's going to be just politically untenable. And again, a LEHR garden is very water efficient. We would actually, if we could catch rainwater off of this roof of the school, we'd probably never have to use a drop of tap water. But that's a different video yet again. So I want to jump into kind of the economics around a LEHR garden. So Again, I said, maybe it's going to take an hour, a month or so to kind of tune the garden up and make sure that it's going to be maintained, it's going to be running correctly. What if there wasn't somebody on the staff that even needed to do that? And so let's jump in a little bit into the financial aspects of a LEHR Garden. How does the money work out? And again, from the last video, I had all of these things on the board. I actually just left them up there. I just changed out the red column. So let's kind of talk about that. So the first thing that I want to do is we're going to be comparing to this 4x24 column. That is a farm bed. And for a school garden, for right now, I'm assuming that we're going to be able to find funding for 2 of those farm beds, and we could potentially expand from there. But that's certainly something that we can talk about in the beginning. So to start off, let's talk about the cost. Okay, so if it's $6,500 for one, it's going to be about $13,000 to build 2 of those. Now, that sounds like quite a bit of money, but one of the things that I've seen is if you can find the right sources, there are people who will front that money. I actually talked to a person who does a lot of nonprofit work with school gardens, and she told me that she knows of one particular school where they spent $85,000 to build one garden, and that garden failed a year and a half later. So when I showed her the number of how much it was going to cost, her jaw dropped. She was absolutely flabbergasted that I could do it for that little. And certainly that's a good number for me. I'm perfectly happy with that number. I could build a lot of gardens in a lot of schools for $85,000. So let's kind of come down the thing here. So if we've got 2 gardens, every time we harvest it, it's going to produce about 200 gallons of soil. If we're sticking with our $15 a gallon, then it's going to be about $3,000 worth of income to us per year. Now, we talked about splitting this thing, like if we do it every 9 months, and then we can do that. But I don't think that's going to be the best option at a school garden, because what we're going to want to do every year is swap that soil out during summer break. And so we want that garden prepared for fall gardening as soon as the students come back. And in fact, if they needed to, we could even plant it ahead of that fall gardening. And then it's going to go all the way through the school year, and then we'll just reset it in the summer. In a colder climate, perhaps we would reset it in the winter and let it really get going, kind of get that soil creation process during the dormancy of the winter time. So coming down here, if we look at the reset cost, so it's cost about $500 to reset a garden, and in terms of a LEHR Garden, I'm going to go ahead and double that just to be on the safe side. But a lot of those reset costs are in travel time and sifting. Those don't completely double, but it's pretty close. If I do have to take 2 trips for wood chips, then there might be pretty close to double that amount of time. So we're going to go ahead and double that just to be on the conservative side. Now let's just say that so one of the things we talked about in backyard farms is I've got quite a bit of excess money in the over and above the reset costs in the soil amplifier that's coming out of there, and we could potentially kick back a portion of that to backyard farmers. Schools, you can't do that. They have all kinds of rules in place that say where they can and can't accept money from. So it really would not work for us to give them money back. What we can do, however, is help them run that school program. So the easiest way that we could do that would be if we have a person who's going to go out once a month and check over the garden, tune it up, make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to, change the settings as needed, potentially even provide plants. That $500 does actually include plant starts. So, we could help them provide plants, seeds, stuff like that. So we can do a lot of that maintenance that they don't necessarily have staff to do. We'll take care of that. So if we have somebody, and let's just say for the sake of argument that we're billing about $100 an hour, that's a fairly high rate, but again, conservative, and they're coming out once a month or as needed. That's going to average to about $12,000 a year. $1,200 a year, sorry. So if we have $1,000 to reset the soil and then an additional $1,200 to maintain the garden, we're looking for it at a total cost to ourselves of $2,200. Coming out of that $3,000, we have $800 left. Now, again, if we look at this as an investment in soil, we can take that $800 that we cannot give to the school, and we can put that in a fund. And as we start getting in the beginning, we're going to need other funding sources to start building those those school gardens. And as we get those gardens all into the system, and we're maintaining them, and we're continuing to harvest that soil once a year from every garden, we get about $800. So that's something where that money can then start to aggregate, and eventually we get to a point where the garden fund, we don't really need those startup costs anymore. We can reinvest that into new gardens and allow the program to pay for itself as we start to continue to build out school gardens. So it's something where I think there's just a ton of opportunities and a ton of value that can be created, both for the schools and for private enterprise that's going to make this happen.